Today, we are going to talk about one of the most important pieces of public art to be unveiled in Washington, D.C., maybe in America, in some time. The magnificent sculpture just installed as the centerpiece of the World War I memorial in the heart of Washington, D.C. I think it's a remarkable, emotional, original, powerful piece of work. Here's its sculptor, Sabin Howard, to discuss.
It is a prescription for war, this Iraqi invasion of Kuwait.
December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
The bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate.
We continue to face a grave situation in Iran.
The people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall never surrender.
For maps, videos, and images, follow us on Instagram, and also feel free to follow me on Twitter at Aaron B. McLean. Hi, I'm Aaron McLean. Thanks for joining School of War. I am delighted to welcome to the show today Sabin Howard. He is the sculptor of A Soldier's Journey, which is being installed here in just a couple of months. Though I think we're recording this in July. We'll put this episode up right when it goes up at the National World War I Memorial here in Washington, D.C. Sabin is a sculptor. He grew up in New York and Italy, which I'm going to ask you about. Studied at the Philadelphia College of Art, New York Academy of Art. He's taught. He's been elected to the board of the National Sculpture Society, 50 solo and group shows, and now the man behind this. What I have to say, I've only seen pictures. I've not seen the thing itself, but what looks to be a really remarkable work getting installed in Washington, D.C. Sabin, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Aaron. I'm really pleased to be here and share this with your audience.
So before we get to World War I and what you've spent the last several years of your life working on, how does one become a sculptor here at in the 21st century? How did you grow up? How did this passion start for you?
I got to differentiate myself from the art world. It's like I entered into a task and a mission on October 22nd, 1982. I was working in a furniture restoration shop in South Philly, and 4 o'clock that day, I decided I was going to become an artist, and I made a move by calling my dad, asking him, I want to be an artist. And he said, how long is this going to last? And here we are. And I began that day from zero. I could not draw. And I ended up at a school in Philadelphia that taught traditional methodologies of creating figurative art. And this is very different than what has been going on in the world. I learned how to make Renaissance type figures from live models that plays forward Western civilization and a rich lineage that is ours, rightly ours. And this sculpture was kind of what I envisioned from the very beginning. I wanted to make art that was like Raphael, Michelangelo, and Leonardo. And I had no idea when I started that there was this whole modern art movement that I would butt horns and be blocked until this project came into being. And so this is a really long 42-year voyage that will finally be unveiled on September 13th to the public.
So there's a lot packed into what you just said, and I kind of want to get to all of it in time to include, and I've seen you comment on this in other venues, but the profound irony of a World War I, a sculpture about World War I being classical as opposed to modernist. But we'll come back to that. So you spent a lot of time in Italy as a young man, and maybe later. How did that influence your aesthetic style, or does it all come from that school, or what's the mix in your terms
The
of
mix
influence
is,
on
that's
you?
a really interesting question. The mix is twofold. I'm bicultural. So, and it plays a huge element in who I am, how my hard drive is set, how I perceive the world. I grew up born in New York City, boom, right on the boat, back to Italy. My mother's Italian. And so my first walkings around of like city and urban centers are Milan, Turin, and I see all this stuff, and and my first language is Italian. And so then all of a sudden now we're three, and I'm back to the United States. And where do I land? Vietnam War, anti-war marches, think outside the box, counterculture. And that's who I am. It's like I am someone who was really highly influenced by the beauty of Europe and traditionalism and what that art is all about on a philosophical level. And then on the other side, it's like, what do you do with your life? The United States 1960s. How do you create your destiny, manifest your destiny? That's what the United States are about. So that's who I am, and that's what this project's about.
Well, let's talk about this project. How does a commission like this come someone's way? I know there were competitions involved. I also, I'm speaking to you from Washington D.C. And for anyone who's not yet seen a picture of the work that you've produced, and soon will be able to go in person here in Pershing Square and see it for themselves in bronze. It's an incredibly powerful piece, and it is I'm going to move past my competence here in terms of my actual vocabulary to analyze these things, but it is modern in a way, in the sense that
Very
you couldn't create what you've created in the 17th or 16th century. It's not,
100%.
it's not possible, and yet it clearly is spiritually classical in a way that DC memorial public sculpture is often not. I mean, obviously, we famously have the Vietnam Memorial from Maya Lin. We have the less well known but quite unfortunate in my view Eisenhower Memorial. That
Garbage.
yeah, no, I totally agree. There's a great moment for anyone who has, and there's no reason why anyone would see this. It's actually kind of like tucked in it's downtown, but it's tucked in sort of an out of the way corner of downtown DC. It's in front of this brutalist Department of Education behemoth building, and it's got this big screen, this like metal mesh screen as part of the design. And during one of the you no doubt know all this, but during one of the design hearings, the designers, I guess it's Frank Gehry, right, or his firm, the designers were asked to justify this massive metal screen, and they said, well, we have to hide this Department of Education building. And then some wag just asked, well, what's going to hide the screen? you know.
Yeah,
But anyway,
exactly.
the point of my question, to get to the question, is this is not the trend in Washington D.C.
No, not
This
at
kind
all.
of sculpture. So, what was the process like? How do you get selected? Why is this off trend?
I wanna link this up to the Eisenhower Memorial because I was actually called by Frank Gehry out to his offices in Los Angeles, and I asked him very bluntly, "Do you want me to be your in-house sculptor, or do you want me to tell you what I think with my 35 years experience?" I told him exactly what I thought, that it was a very natural history type museum, experiential thing where there's no cohesive focal point, and I'm well versed and educated in how to make monuments because that's what I learned. That's my education. Frank didn't know a damn thing about making monuments, and I don't think he's a bad guy, except he's a modernist, and you can't use that information of modernism to actually elevate and make art for we the people.
Hmm.
He kept me on and fired me after 3 months because I was stylistically, in quotation marks, not the correct sculptor that put the bug in my ear. That's why I'm telling you that. And that moment then led to this competition where Justin Schubau reached out to me from Civil Art Society in DC and said, "Hey, Sabin, you got to enter this project. This is a good one." I entered it. I got into the final with Joe Weishar, and we won this January 22nd of 2016. It was a global competition, blind global competition, because the Centennial Commission wished to do the same thing that Maya Lin did. It's like they wanted to give a chance to anything and not know who it was tied to. And it was in response to the Eisenhower Memorial, which was done because of favoritism.
Hmm.
Frank was hired by somebody in government, and this was not at all that. I was hired for specifically my drawings, and Joseph Weishar, the architect in training at that moment, 25-year-old kid who stuck to the directions of the competition, which were create an urban park with a national memorial in it. And his vision of the architecture was as closely tied to the structure and the bones of that original Friedberg design. So then we win this and we begin, and I have to spend now the next 9 months with Centennial Commission coming up with a whole new iteration. And I did that over 25 iterations, shooting 12,000 images of models in actual uniforms with a drawing. Then we went to the Commission of Fine Arts, and then we were in the mud of Washington. We got out eventually, and in 2019, I started sculpting.
How did you come to learn about the First World War? How much did you know when you got into this? What was the process that you followed? What did you read? What was that learning side of this for you like?
I'm going to be very honest with you. I have a very good education in history. My dad is a PhD historian. My mom is a PhD historian, and I had not a deep understanding of World War One, but I had a deep understanding that you needed to know our past because it's the umbrella that unifies nations and people and communities and groups. So I had a tremendous amount of value for you need to know what you're doing. There's a weird thing here. You get a project like this and you get brought to Washington, and then all of a sudden you're dealing with 100 plus sculpting experts from DC. I'm being facetious. I was told, do this, more horses, more barbed wire, more machine guns, more trench war, no man's land. Can you put dogs in even, biplanes? And I have
Yeah.
smoke coming out my ears.
Yeah.
And and you're just like, you want to please everybody. You're an artist. You got a great job. It's like, but you've got a vision. And so, well, how do you manage this? There was a moment in my studio in the South Bronx where I looked at a poster on the wall. It's The Last Judgment by Michelangelo. And there was this moment, an aha moment, where I was like, do what you know. And that's what I know. I know how to make figures that are interconnected, intertwined. And that Last Judgment shows all of us meeting our maker. That's the humanity of that project, of his work, the energy of those figures. And I took that, and that was kind of like the path then to be on moving forward on the project. And that gave me back the grounding that I needed to play forward the vision. And the iterations that we did kept getting better and better. There were many iterations that, some of them were just too over the top in how destructive World War One was. And this is a long way of saying that I did not read that much about World War One after the first week, because I realized that this project was about human beings and humanity. It was not about governments and what happened at the higher level of the elites. I had to make a project that was about what happens to human beings. And I got that because I started looking at images of the war on Google. And I'm seeing these things of like soldiers in trains saying goodbye to their fiancés and their moms and dads. And all of a sudden I'm struck with the fact that, oh my God, they look like kids, and that looks like my daughter. And you got to do something that is not about the buttons or the guns. This is about the human feelings and emotions that happen to people when they are thrown into battle and war that crushes and grinds to death. It's an industrial warfare. It's the first one on the world, the planet, and it's just 50,000 people dying in an afternoon. And it's like, what is this about? It's about human beings, not about governments. So I'm sorry to disappoint a lot of people. I read a little bit about World War One, but ultimately I returned to humanity, and that's what I'm portraying in this project.
Yeah, it's the thing that every war movie gets wrong, of course, is the age of the soldiers. Almost every war movie I've ever seen, the actors are, in their 20s, maybe their 30s. The reality is that the soldiers, I mean, my Marines back in the day were 19, 20 years old, almost to a man.
Yeah.
Your point about being encouraged to put in, dogs and no man's land, that points to something about the piece that I wouldn't have been able to articulate without you saying that, without you pointing out that there's none of that in there. Is while I mean, I mean, the uniforms and everything it's obvious if doesn't have to say World War One on it for you to know that it's World War One. And then obviously, I want to go through it with you in a minute. The scenes depicted are, they're sort of these archetypical scenes of departure and battle and so forth. But it is free of period cliche in a
Yes.
way that, like, if you go to the FDR memorial, which actually is not the worst. It's not the worst memorial, and I'd be curious to know your view. But it's full of that kind of stuff. It's been a while since I've been there, so there's the dog, there's, it's crowd pleasing. It's crowd
Yeah.
pleasing and familiar.
Yeah. I did something that was more an on-the-job training. The project really changed. The first half of the first almost 30 feet are very different than the second 30 feet. I began with college boys and women that's what and it fits because the people that left our soil were inexperienced at war. And so their faces show that they have a Victorian era type look, and there is not that horrible quality of how a face picks up the history of what that person's been in. So I get to the midpoint on the figures, and it's like something needs to change here. And I had a few conversations with people, and I brought veterans in. And I'm bringing this up to you because, Aaron, this I learned something really deep on this project. In service of is so significant for military, but it should be more significant for civilians. I became in service of something way larger than myself on this project. And I learned this from the veterans. I used six veterans from Marine Corps, Navy SEALs, Rangers, both from Iraq and Afghanistan combat tours of duty. And each one of those soldiers, we became very close friends. And the reality happened that I am actually part of that group now because I became in service of their story, and their faces are indelibly sculpted in bronze, beating mortality and showing what they went through. And their faces are contorted and show a weight and a damage from being in battle that college boys do not have. And I did something that I don't think other people have done. I redesigned on the fly. I redesigned these figures at over life-size scale as I went along. That's kind of like unheard of. You got to have a lot of confidence, and it brought a lot of vitality to the sculpture because it's not a finished piece, so to speak. The surface is still in process, but it's a process that shows how I added the clay. So it's very modern and very Mars-like, aggressive. It's very active, and that actually is really fitting of war. The ground is swirling with mud. There are shells. There are helmets of the dead on the ground. There is a handprint of a child. We will find it. There is a lot of humanity in that wall, and that is what I learned. And I can speak about it now without crying, but it is horrible what people were forced into doing, charging towards like machine guns. Come on, think about it for a sec. Those things just rip you apart. You're done. And this is to honor. It is preserve the memory of those people, but it's also a universal story of all soldiers. So that's my contribution to the planet.
So this is it's a remarkable piece of work in a number of ways, not least just most basically. I mean, the plain scale of it. You were alluding to it just now. There's 38 figures,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's 58 feet long, give or take.
Correct.
And it tells a story. I want to, if why don't we try, and we'll do our best. I mean, if listeners don't do this while you're driving your car, but if you can, you can pull up images of I guess what are clay models of this, and soon you'll be able to pull up images of the thing itself installed. Let's go through it if you wouldn't mind. There, left to right, we start with this scene of departure, and there's initially what three. Well, I'll let you describe it, but there's a soldier on a knee holding up or receiving a helmet. What's this first scene?
The first scene, the first figure is the daughter. The alpha and omega of the project is the daughter. And it is to show the next generation are the bookends. The next generation is what suffers the most from war because they are left with war. And so the first scene is the daughter is handing her kneeling dad the helmet. The helmet is right side up, so you don't see the insides of that helmet. And the wife is behind the kneeling dad with her hands on his shoulders, comforting him. And that scene is calm, peaceful, and it is the world before World War I, which is the divine order, harkens to the Victorian era. Should I proceed? I can run down the line if you
Yeah,
wish.
well, let's go. So then it's initiate, and I just want to understand. I'm looking at an image right now as we speak, and then these characters, the main character repeats. Does he have a
Father.
name? Do you give him a name?
Yeah. Yes, I call him the father, and he is the
Father.
allegory for the United States. In the
Please.
studio, we call him the dad. And the dad appears 5 times in this wall. He is the hero's journey. And In short, in one sentence, the story is a dad, soldier, allegory, United States, leaves home, enters into battle, and is transformed only to return home and hand his daughter, the next generation, his helmet. That is the story in a nutshell. And then this next scene is the dad is now in a tug of war between the heroic mom and the Brotherhood of Arms. He's being right in the middle, right there, pulled from one arm and each way. And the heroic mom is an allegory for the United States because we were, reluctant to enter into a combat on the other side of the Atlantic. We were an agrarian nation entering into this battle. And I looked at the $20 gold coin and thought about you need to create a woman here that is larger than life. So she is really out there on the edge of the podium of this sculpture. So she is right in your face as a visitor and a viewer. You're going to see a very heroic, noble, powerful, graceful woman, equally as energized and as strong as the soldier on the other side of the dad, pulling him forward with the Brotherhood of Arms in service of one's country.
And then we move from there to battle, right? This is ordeal is what
Yes.
it's called.
Exactly.
And the motion, the motion is always sort of to the right as the eye looks at it, right? And so,
Yeah.
and he's the gentleman. The father is the gentleman, and these all three scenes is the one without his helmet.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
And you have a gap now, right after the initial home front scene, you have a gap, which is the Atlantic Ocean. And then you jump into almost this school of fish, which is these men in battle with this bestial energy of huge aggression, anger. It's Mars. This is Mars at war, advancing forward. And it's a unit, but they're not marching the way. This is done very creatively. It's like a force of nature, like a tornado. Those figures, I can't find another figure that shows somebody running like that in sculpture. Like there's a charging guy there. He's full tilt run,
Yeah.
leaning forward very, very violently with the bayonet drawn. This is supposed to look like something that you're like out of hell. This is like men are transformed. And think about it. You are told, get out of the trench and charge forward. You're going to be pissing in your pants, and you're going to have to turn into. You're just going to have to like become an animal to do this. It's like this is what I learned. I was a rock climber for years. You get into a place that you are going to die, and you get real calm, and you make it happen. This is what is forced upon these men, and they are led now the very center of the composition by the dad, who's reminiscent of a pose of the Marine
Yes.
Daly, Dan
Yes, of course.
Daly, who
You
yelled at
sons of bitches want to
Elwood,
live forever.
yes, "You sons of bitches, you wanna live forever," and that is reminiscent of that man, and it's also reminiscent of an image that I took from I think a Russian man. I found it on the internet, and I reversed the image, but I like that. I wanna talk to you a little bit about that figure because I wanna give you this symbolism behind it. The heart is very open. It's like he's not in a crucifix pose, but his arms are outstretched and his head is rotated, advancing forward, screaming, "Come on, you sons of a bitches, do you wanna live forever?" He is full on, and one leg is bent and the other leg is pushing off. And I did this. How do you make something so kinetic? What I did is I started taking bursts with the camera. So I take 12 shots and I'd say, "Okay, Paul," he was the model, "I want you to act out this movement from calling and advancing forward. And I'm going to run the camera." And boom, we find the one image where his back foot's lifting up the ground. And it's a kinetic movement. You can't hold that for more than a millisecond. And so I captured that. And I had to change my whole style of working. I'm doing this esoteric stuff for 35 years. That's too still and too Greek looking. It's not going to work for general public. They're coming here to get, something visceral, something that's exciting. And so I had to change my style. In this battle scene, I really learned how to do it. So that's the dad again. And that's the very, very middle of the whole wall.
And then, so for each one of these figures, then I presume there's some similar story, like the charging man that you were just talking about. It is an incredible pose. Does that come from an image that you found, your imagination, some combination, some pose of the model that you've recorded? Like, talk about that one.
Interesting you asked me. A great question, Aaron. That figure comes from a man, James Mansfield, who is a friend of mine from the UK. I've known him for years in New York City. That guy came to me and said, "I want to be a model." I'm like, "James, come on, man. You're doing very well in your construction contracting business. Why the hell do you want to be a model for me in South Bronx?" And he's like, "Please, it's important to me." So he poses and he brings me this massive energy, he's getting everybody else juiced, and all the models are like starting to get into it because he's bringing a game. And so I say, "James, you got to tell me, why are you so excited about this project? What brings this to what? Why are you bringing such light? You're like a catalyst for this project. You're getting everybody emotionalized, and I'm getting great poses out of everybody because of you." And he said, "All right, I'll tell you after we work today." So we sit down on my ratty, dusty couch in the studio after work, and he goes, "Hey, I got to tell you, it's kind of serious story. It's like my great great grandfather and my great great uncle were in World War One, and my great great grandfather never returned from battle. My great great uncle came back and with his service revolver proceeded to shoot his wife, his daughter, and then himself. And I grew up in that very home, and it has haunted me since that moment. And that is why I am so adamant on bringing my game to your project, because it is so important to so many people. There's a ripple effect from what happened from our relatives in England who died, and then I am that progenitor, that I am that generation of today that is still affected by that on a deep visceral level. And that to me was the beginning of an understanding on a deeper level that this project is about human beings and people. And you have to do a really good job in showing the emotions in their bodies and in their morphology and in their faces. And that charging figure was a breakthrough figure for me because it's so loaded with and just energy. It's like bam, it's like superhero but human.
So you keep making reference to faces, and I'm going to offer an observation. And again, this is not my field, so take this for what it's worth. But I am curious to hear your response, which is something about the faces, something about the combination of what I will crudely call the photorealism of the expressions, and then the energy that you're making reference to, the extraordinary sort of feeling of movement that one gets, even though it's obviously literally, immobile, is what makes it feel so modern. That is to say, maybe you'll tell me I'm wrong, but I can't imagine, you know,
No, you're
um,
right. You're right.
yeah, either a Greek or a Renaissance sculpture conveying the same thing, and is it a style? Where in the balance of elements here is it your stylistic decisions? Is it literally the technology and what you're able to do with photos and the models that allow you to do this? Like how does this come about now and it hasn't come about before?
The you're 100% right. It is modern. What I did is I looked into the past, and I didn't see it as something of the past. Remember, I'm European by descent, so I don't feel like I have to recreate the wheel at every turn. So I problem solved by looking at the past, and I looked at, like, Canova, he's a sculptor, neoclassical. He did these 2 boxing warriors that are at the Vatican. Thought about that for a second, and the lunging forward, and then I thought about, like, okay, let's take some pictures to get the action and grab the moment. And then you can figure out how you're gonna sculpt the model in parts, but you got an idea of how the whole pose is working. And I've created something that is following through with the tradition of figurative art from Western civilization, but it is not archaeological. It is completely innovative. It's out the box thinking. It's completely new. And this is what modern art is. It's like break the wheel, make something new. And I'm taking that literally. I'm like making a war memorial that has never been done before. You have never seen anything so loaded with action, except maybe the Shrady Memorial, but that's the one, the Grant Memorial in front of the Capitol. And that was also what the commission, Centennial Commission, Edwin Fountain said, "Hey, go look at that." And I like that. I like that emotional drive. So He was like, "You got the job, now give me something that's active, that people that are not in the art world were gonna get and appreciate." And remember, you're making a sculpture for visitors to Washington, DC to understand the history of our country. You can't make it like the Geary thing that's not exciting to people. You have to make it a sculpture about we the people, populist art, but that doesn't mean that you go low base because people want to see real art. And the this is a problem in the art world. I mean, modern art is very elite oriented. You need to read a book to understand what you're looking at. It's no longer visual because the concepts in the book explain what you're looking at, and then all of a sudden it's like an aha moment. But it's not really working as a piece of art in itself because you got to read the manual. I'm telling you, go look at the art that I made. You're going to get the art directly looking at it. You don't need to read a damn book about understanding it, but you can if you want to. I wrote one. It's going to come out in the spring. You can read it if you want to know more about it. But I made a piece that I want a 6-year-old to get. And this is why I'm making a movement now called American Cultural Revolution, that we're going to play this forward into the future. And I believe that this is the only place in the whole world the only country that you can actually do this, where you can be so creative that you can actually invent things and play forward without. And I'm a little different because I'm saying hold on to tradition, conserve what is sacred. And to me, Western civilization is sacred. I'm gonna go do something else now to play forward that, but I'm also going to be inventive and be modern. And so that's a cool thing that you notice the faces. Those faces would never be seen in classical art because maybe some of the paintings of Caravaggio in Rome, where you see people being beheaded, and the models that were used by Caravaggio, the painter, were whores and street people with dirty feet and dirty nails and reality. But he got a lot of flack for doing that.
Yeah. At a more prosaic, less aesthetic level, just I want to also praise your young colleague, the architect of
Yeah.
the park, because in a way that I think is not true, for example, of the World War II
Yeah.
memorial, which my dad was a World War II veteran. I've been there many times. It's not bad like the Eisenhower Memorial is. I think just bad. It's got its merits, but I've walked around. You can walk in the World War One memorial is open now. It just lacks the centerpiece sculpture. It is fantastic as an educational
Yeah.
experience without feeling without you feeling sort of condescended to or demeaned in the way that some museums can do. It's got, for example, those amazing maps inscribed on the walls in the same way that overseas American cemeteries do, showing the campaign history of the wall, something that the
Yes.
World War II memorial lacks. When you really could take a young person there and learn about the war, and then as you point out at a deeper level, be moved by the centerpiece art, which again I like. I don't hate the World War II memorial, but I don't think I've ever been. You can be sort of when you start to think about the stars that represent the fallen. I mean, that has a kind of emotional impact, but it's still kind of abstract.
Yeah, cerebral.
Um,
It's
yeah,
not visceral, not in your gut. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So just we've been moving from left to right, so let's keep going. So after ordeal in the center of the piece, we go to aftermath with, to me, just visually, you have the dad sort of standing, it's sort of breaking the fourth wall. He's just staring out at us. And to
yeah.
me, this is this. I don't know if you think of it this way, but to me, it seems like this. It's the off center of gravity of the piece. It's where my eye goes to.
You spot on. It is the focal point. This is my favorite part of the whole wall. This is the part where I really had to rise to the occasion as an artist and do something super creative. I was shocked one morning as a little kid. I walked out to my hallway. I lived in an apartment building in New York City, and I had to pick up the newspaper every morning and bring it to my dad, breakfast table. So I go out, and there was this picture of I, a girl that had just been napalmed out of Vietnam, and it's black and white, and
Yeah.
she's running stark naked right at the viewer. Front page New York Times. 6-year-old sees this. I'm that 6-year-old. That image got indelibly seared on my brain. I am. You will not meet another human being on the planet more anti-war than myself as an artist. I hate war because I was brought into this early on in my life. I had to my parents were obsessed with Vietnam. They wa and, I mean, a fact from not being in a military family and not having lost relatives, my grandfather was in World War II, and he was in the Italian army, and he raised me, and he was captured by the British in Libya. He escaped as a POW and then walked across the Sahara at night, got across all the way to the, Straits of Messina and walked and hitchhiked all the way back to Torino, all of Italy in 3 months. And so he raised me, and so I have a very human heart towards us, humanity, as and when I guess I'm the right guy for this job because that image stuck in my head, and so the cost of war is loaded with those images. It begins with a gap, and in back of the wall, there is a crucifix actually that has it's not standing upright, it's tilted on an angle, and it is falling apart, and it is the end of God. That is the statement that I have made. I snuck that one in. Didn't ask for any, authority with the Centennial Commission or the Commission of Fine Arts. I just put it in while I was in New Zealand doing the 10-foot model. Went rogue on that one. And then the next scene is a Pietà scene. A Pietà scene comes from the Renaissance where Christ is lowered from the cross and usually is held by his mother or to, up disciples. And in this case, they're disciples, and it's a triptych with 3 soldiers, and it is a man who is it's very Christ-like because he's in a crucifix type pose. So he has now sacrificed his life for his country and for his soldier, peers. And above him is a chaplain. The chaplain's head is Joe. Joe was a 23-year service Marine, rose to captain, 3 tours of duty in Iraq, combat duty. One of the worst ones was 150 days of taking shells. It's on his face. He came back, had a heart attack, drove himself to the hospital. That's the kind of man Joe is. The other man is a Turkish man who carries also military history. And the other guy has an Italian face, so you see his skull really well. And they are all together. The next scene now, you go to the next one, it is a nurse. The nurse is holding up a gassed soldier who has been blinded. One hand is grasping his eyes, covering his eyes, and the other hand, he's blind. He's reaching forward into nothingness, and his mouth is wide open in a scream. The gas mask is open and dangling in front of him. It's the gas mask itself is like a skeleton, vertebral skeleton going up to the skull. The gas mask looks like a skull. And I used my older daughter, she's 34 years old, and she's a doctor, for the nurse, and the outfit is a real nurse outfit from the Smithsonian Museum, which we tattered because that piece took around 800 hours to make, so it saw a lot of duty. She is very large and very powerful, and if she were to stand, she would is 7'2". So I did what Michelangelo did in the Pietà in St. Peter's in Rome, where the Virgin Mary is over scale, over Christ, because she is so large and encompasses such an important idea. And now we're going to move to the shell shock soldier, which is the dad again. And this is the principal figure at 3/4 mark on the wall. And it is where the light will shine at night and illuminate him popping off the wall. He is a very interesting figure because World War I is the transformation of the globe in terms of how we see ourselves as human beings. I told you, we move from a divine order to modern alienation, nihilism. Sartre, Camus are the French philosophers that come out and write about this idea that we are no longer ruled by order. We have now moved into a moment of chaos and alienation. And he is walking directly off the platform at you. His foot is off the platform into nothingness. And I used a veteran for the body, Ricky Zambrano, who was a Marine in Afghanistan. And we talked a lot about that pose. And the head was Chris, who is an Army Ranger. And Chris had seen a lot of combat clearing stuff in Iraq. Very, very powerful face. I said, Chris, what is it like to be shell shocked? And he did this face, and it just came naturally. The distortions, the asymmetry of his mouth, the fear, the anger, the confusion. It's like a flood of all these different things. This is a humanity showing up on that face. And it's a big figure. That figure is the one that I spent the most time on that whole wall, 1,100 hours. I really struggled with that one because you got to get it right because it's so important to these guys that are going to come see this piece, and this piece is for them.
Yeah, I predict, Sabin, that this particular piece, this part of the overall work, is going to enter the this sounds like it's not high praise, but that's not intentional. But it's going to enter the DC highlight reel. That is to say, when images of what you see when you come to DC are strung out, this will be one of them. I can't. It's hard. You can't. We're doing our best. You obviously are the most qualified person to describe this piece in words, but it's not the same as looking at it. So I do encourage people to visit, or at least in the short term, take a look at the actual pictures. Okay, and then the return. The return. We have the soldier and his daughter, the father and the daughter again.
Yeah, the next scene is very interesting. I call the next scene the superhero section, and I went out and got a bodybuilder to do the legs of that nurse. So bear in mind, the shell shock soldier is flanked right and left by nurses. The nurses are, most females that are sculpted today are not powerful the way they should be portrayed. Women in my life are very powerful, and they're not like cutesy Barbie types. I did something here where I made this nurse like driving forward. And again, she's stronger than the soldier she carries. He cannot get home at all. And the head is Jessica, who's the wife of my assistant, Charlie Mostow. And her dad is a colonel, was in Afghanistan. And Jessica's sister is also, Army, and so military family. And she's driving forward, very powerful figure, raised up on a bunch of rocks, moving at a diagonal down. I spent a long time on that figure, 3 models, get that figure right. And the wounded soldier's head is going up. It's like pitched up. And what's right in front of him? Like the American flag. And that's the next scene. The next scene, I call it the 3 amigos. So there are these 3 men. And I used a Marine, Ricky Zambrano, again for the head and the body on that figure. That guy is on the outside. He's driving forward, but his head's turned backwards, and he's looking at what he just left, which is a shell shock guy in the battle scene. And he's going forward, and his chest is out, and he's driving. And he has been changed by the war. He is the definition of a warrior. He's the definition of what we saw with Donald Trump being shot. Like the same thing, fist in the air, except his body is pushing forward. That's what I did in that figure. The next figure is a wounded soldier he's being carried by this heroic figure, and the internal figure, which is a black soldier, and he is in almost a crucifix pose again. He's hanging listless, and one leg is dragging behind, but he's looking forward. His chin's jutting forward. And I used a Matt, who is a Navy SEAL, for the head of this, who had also seen a lot of stuff. And then the inside figure is a black man, Amari, who's a young kid, and he's wearing a French helmet because what happened is the blacks were handed over to the French and given to them, and that's where they got their uniforms and their equipment that entered into combat. And in the next scene, you're looking at the parade scene, and this man is marching, and the flag is on a diagonal, the pole, so it goes over the previous scene, the superhero section. And that figure carrying the flag is a very large kinetic energy. A ranger was used for the head, and a Marine was used for the body. It's very powerful, interlaced now with another figure driving forward. I used a Korean soldier who was a Marine as well, Afghanistan duty. And the inside, I used a female wearing a Salvation Army nurse's uniform. And the reason I did that is because there was a change. We were no longer the agrarian nation. It looks like a very powerful group of figures, but very human. They're not in sync. They're all pushing and pulling together to move home. This is the superpower, the industrialized superpower that we become, the future. And now we're at the very, very final scene.
And this is the father returning the helmet to the daughter, but now upturned.
Yeah, that's right. The dad is now returning home. And okay, this is difficult. This was very, very challenging. Okay, so let's think about it for a second. You have this freight train of the parade scene coming straight down on this little kid. Kid's like older. She's now 14. She's developed. She's prepubescent. Before she was 11, now she's 14. I used my daughter, who was 14 in the first scene. Now my daughter's 19. So I used her as a model for the head. And the body now it's not fully developed, but I had to is a very challenging thing. How do you make this figure become a bookend, but still maintain the childlike quality and the allegorical symbolism that she is the next generation of World War II? So the dress is the same as the first figure. It was a dress that I took from a template from a 1917 dress designer. I fabricated that in New Zealand, historically correct, and then it has bands on the chest and bands below the waist that give it almost like they're almost shackles at weight. And the figure with the head is looking directly down into helmet. She's divining the future, World War II. And there's a stress on her neck because it's like it's a stressful position. She's bearing the weight of what she's been handed. And the dad is kind of looming above her a little bit. He's a little bit it's not like a joyous scene. It's not like a lot of smiling. He's looking down on her. His gun is still in his hand, which wouldn't be going on. You know, you don't come home with your gun. Service weapon is down though. And so it's a way of showing the man returns from battle, re-enters and meets his kid, and he's carrying his load. His that's still in him. It's still a part of him. And it's an uncomfortable meeting, but there's also a lot of love there because he's letting go of the helmet. He doesn't hold it. He releases the helmet. She holds the helmet. It's open. Pandora's box is now open. The war to end all wars is the beginning of a time, 104-year history, where there has never been a moment away from wars.
I also took it to be, and you tell me if this is right or wrong, but he's a citizen. He's a citizen soldier. So there's something about receiving the helmet.
Yes.
He was not raised in a warrior caste, and he will not continue as a professional warrior. This was a
Yeah.
period of his life, like so
That's
many
exactly
Americans
right. It's the return. Yeah, and the head is exactly the same as when he was believe this or not, it's the same head. I used the same head as the departing dad,
Hmm.
but I resculpted the neck and certain parts of the cranium to make it fit the sculpture. So changing the tilt of the head and having him look down it's the same. It's exactly the same sculpture. I cast it in clay. I poured clay into the mold that I had sculpted in the first one, so there would be no confusion that that was the same man. But changing the head to the core, the sternum, changes the story.
You can tell from my line of questioning that I'm not a regular consumer of, it's a terrible phrase, observer of sculpture, and this piece really, just images of it have really moved me. I'm looking forward to seeing the thing itself. I want to, in the few minutes we have left, I kind of want to give the devil his due and sort of hear your responses to what strike me as sort of obvious lines of question or criticism of a piece like this. The first, which we've been sort of you've alluded to numerous times, we haven't really encountered it straight on, but it is deeply ironic, as you point out, that this piece of sculpture, which is about the onset of modernity. It's about Pandora's box is the myth you made reference to. It's about the beginning of the long dark 20th century. It's sort of the proof to. I mean, these forces were already unleashed, right? Nietzsche's writing before World War One. Modernism starts in art before World War One, but something about World War One that proves that they're all on the right track. That actually this whole modern project has gone awry. It's all falling apart, and that produces kinds of art that are I'm going to make some editorial comments now, anti-civilizational, not in a simply a moral way, but in an effort. I mean, I was always, my understanding of modern art is heavily colored by an essay by Guy Davenport called "The Symbol of the Archaic," where he taught me that what Picasso and others are after is to wipe away
Yes.
civilization such as it's come down to us from the Greeks and go back earlier and find sort of deep animal motive forces early in human history and return those to the center of aesthetic appreciation. And that's modernism. This has all been a mistake. It's a terrible mistake. Don't believe me? Go to the no man's land at the Somme and you'll see what a mistake all of modern human history has been. So let's try to do something new and better. And yet your piece, well, obviously, you can't make this piece earlier. It is of its day. It obviously is deeply in homage to a classical tradition. I could imagine a critic saying that there's something wrong with that there's something untrue to the war. It's contradictory. Help respond to that person. Respond to that line of criticism.
I love your question. It's our what let's look at what my mission was. I'm gonna tell you what I was told. This is what your mission is, Sabin Howard sculptor. I want a sculpture that will excite the visitor when they come and see it, show them what World War One looked like, and make it interesting so they want to know more about what World War One was about. So I took that imperative, and I also was told we like the Schrady Memorial because the Schrady Memorial is so active and kinetic. Schrady Memorial, the Grant Memorial, is the best piece of sculpture in the United States.
Wow.
It was done by a man. It took him 20 years, and then he dies 2 weeks before the unveiling because of the stress. And I'm not going to die 2 weeks before the unveiling. I'm here to make another.
You seem very healthy.
Yeah, I'm ready to go. I have been fighting for 42 years against an art narrative that has become now redundant. What you have talked about with Picasso and others was a reaction to the past. In physics, there is a law of physics. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. I am that equal and opposite reaction. I am the next wave on the beach, and my wave is a wave of beauty, like hitting that platform in Washington, D.C., like a tsunami. And this I'm going to be like Joe Namath. You can see I'm dated. I'm going to guarantee that this will change the art world. This will redirect where we are going because the art world has now collapsed to become only important to its investors, the academies and schools, the academic approach, the critics, and the newspapers. And like a lot of other things on the planet, we're getting a revamp. I'm pushing the reset button, and I'm saying people matter, what people think matters, and how we are represented matters. And frankly, I don't want to be represented by cinder blocks on the floor. I want to be represented by something that elevates our spirit. And my mission as a human being, this is what I was taught by my parents, is to leave the planet a better place than when you came in. And so that's what this memorial does. And I'm giving the gift of culture to this country because we are pretty low on the art appreciation culture level for quite a long time. Modern art was brought up in this country by the Rockefellers and the Modern Art Museum and Doubleday Books, and it was an answer and a reaction to what happened in World War II and World War I. It's like, let's make our art. Let's make an art that is purely American. They didn't bear in mind that the public needed to have an art that represented what their thoughts and sentiments were as well. I'm saying, let's take a look at that again, and let's make an art that is purely American and also represents the needs of we the people. So it's a return to making a populist-driven art that is not saccharine like the last formation of classicism that brought on the modernists. I'm saying, let's change, and here's what I am offering.
Well, I'm looking forward to and I'm rooting for you in your upcoming battle with, for example, Philip Kennicott, the architecture and art critic for the Washington Post. There's no reason why any listener to the show should know who that is. And I'll also say I don't dislike many people just because of their opinions. And Philip Kennicott, for all I know, I've never met the man, maybe a perfectly nice, family man, good owner to his dog and everything else. But I have disliked that guy since he reviewed the 9/11 museum
Yeah.
when it opened, whenever that was. Probably actually about 10 years ago now, almost on the nose. And I still remember reading that review. And if anyone listening hasn't been to the 9/11 museum, you should absolutely go. It's an amazing place, and I think a very fitting memorial to the thousands of people who were murdered. You're on the site. The museum is in the footprint of the towers. And I'm not going to be able to do justice to the sneering quality of his commentary, but it's to the effect of, the Norm Macdonald joke, like, God forbid Al Qaeda sets off or ISIS sets off a nuclear bomb in America, because imagine the Islamophobic reaction that's going to cause. That was like the Philip Kennicott review of the 9/11 museum, but not as a joke, but in real life.
Yeah.
Like this place is just designed to manipulate your emotions and make you feel jingoistic. I'm pretty sure he actually uses the word jingoistic in the review, which if you go to the museum, it's just not true. It's not fair at all. If anything, the museum is restrained in ways when it could really go over the top. And your piece, I could imagine him. I mean, it would be flatly false to say that your piece somehow glorifies war. Flatly false. Nevertheless, because it is classical, because it depicts courage, it depicts, it's not Myelin's, say what you will about the Vietnam War Memorial. It's a statement. I mean, it's a clear aesthetic vision. It's actually very powerful. You can kind of only object to it on political grounds. You can't really, I mean, it's as a work of art, it's very powerful. But I could see you say you're still keeping some of the old lie alive, some of the Wilfred Owen old lie alive by just the way you've done it. And I look forward to that battle.
Thank you. I just want to add to that. I think I don't really care what the art world thinks. I didn't make this thing for the art world. And somebody like Kennicott, I would say to him, Kennicott, show me your 60-foot wall that weighs 25 tons with 38 figures. That's my calling card. Where's yours, bro? And secondly, I would say, I made this piece for the guys and women that have lost things that will never be given back to them, like the 13 that lost their life at the airport in Afghanistan. This is who this sculpture is for. So I don't give a bleep about the art world. They never helped me, and I'm certainly not going to help them. I'm making a piece for the people that actually deserve to get a memorial made for them. That's what it's about.
Sabin Howard, it's a remarkable work. People can come see it right here in Washington, D.C. on Pennsylvania Avenue, right near the White House. I'm looking forward to seeing it. What's the name of your forthcoming book? Tell people what it's called.
The book does not have a title yet. It's a 750-page volume about what I went through and how we made this memorial. But my wife, Tracy Slatton, has made and is in the process of making a documentary called Heroic. You can look at heroicdocumentary.com. And that will come out in the spring. And we had a camera in our face for the whole time. So you're going to see what humans look like when they're struggling to make something like this.
Yeah, it doesn't. It looked physical from the pictures that I've seen.
Yeah.
Sabin Howard, fascinating conversation. Oh yeah. Oh wow. Yeah, I can see you just. Yeah, we're on. Just so folks know, we are on video as we talk, even though we only record the audio. And it looks. Would you break your thumb? What is that?
No, that's from all the clay I put on the wall. It's got might have huge calcium deposits in my thumb.
Oh wow.
Tons of clay.
Wow.
Yeah, so
That's dramatic.
physical human thing.
Thank you so much. Great conversation, and good luck with the unveiling and the battles to come.
Thank you.
This is a Nebulous Media production. Find us wherever you get your podcasts.